September 1941. Vauxhall Motors Factory, Luton, England. The smell of oil and cold iron fills the air as engineers crowd around a hulking mass of riveted steel. Its turret squats low. Its tracks, wide as a man's chest, wrap around its entire body like a shell. Someone mutters under his breath. It looks like a turtle. The name sticks. The A-22 Churchill infantry tank was Britain's desperate answer to disaster. France had fallen. The evacuation from Dunkirk had left the British Army stripped of armour. Now, barely a year later, they needed something, anything, to stand against the threat of German invasion. But the engineers didn't love it. Many laughed. It was slow, barely 15 miles per hour. Its gun, a mere 2-pounder, couldn't even penetrate the frontal armour of a Panzer IV. One officer remarked that it handled like a shed with tracks. In design offices and muddy testing grounds, skepticism grew. Yet deep inside the steel shell was an idea ahead of its time. Thick armour, wide tracks, and immense climbing ability. The Churchill could crawl over bomb craters, scale walls, and dig itself out of shell holes where other tanks would bog down. One of its creators, Sir Albert Stern, defended it fiercely. "This is not a cavalry tank," he insisted, pounding his fist on a drawing board. "It's a fortress on tracks." Still, few were convinced. To the British Tank Board, it was an embarrassment, a stopgap. To the men who'd eventually fight in them, it would prove to be something else entirely. The first true test would come in one of the most unforgiving battlefields of the war. August 19th, 1942. Dieppe, France. The grey dawn was split by the thunder of naval guns. On the pebbled beaches of Dieppe, the sea turned crimson as waves of Canadian infantry stormed ashore and died beneath German fire. Behind them, the rumble of engines grew louder. "Churchills, go!" shouted Major William McLeod, commander of the 14th Canadian Army Tank Regiment. The tanks roared from their landing craft, steel beasts climbing over ramps and obstacles like mechanical beetles. The engineers on shore watched, astonished, as the so-called turtle tanks clawed over seawalls that would have stopped anything else. But luck would not favour them that morning. Many Churchills sank before reaching the beach, their exhausts flooding in seawater. Others were trapped in deep shingle, unable to reverse. German gunners on the cliffs above unleashed a storm of shells. In one moment burned into history, Sergeant Les Cook's Churchill was hit in the side, flames bursting through the hatches. Instead of abandoning it, his crew stayed to cover the retreating infantry. For 30 minutes they fought alone, the gun blazing until the barrel melted. When the smoke cleared, only a charred shell remained. But the legend of the Churchill had begun. Despite the failure of the Dieppe raid, military observers noticed something remarkable. The tanks that made it onto land, even after multiple direct hits, refused to die. They climbed over barriers, fired through embrasures, and shrugged off anti-tank rounds that would have gutted a Sherman. The laughter that once echoed through British factories began to fade. Engineers at Vauxhall took notes. They rebuilt the gearbox, reinforced the hull, and added new attachments. "If this thing can survive Dieppe," one officer remarked, "imagine what it can do when we get it right." And so, in the shadow of disaster, the Churchill was reborn, not as a joke, but as the foundation of a new breed of armoured warfare, the assault tank. By 1943, British engineers were already at work on something extraordinary. Strange contraptions designed to crush bunkers, fling bridges, and spew fire like dragons. Soon, they would be tested on the greatest battlefield of them all. Early 1944, Camp Orford, Dorset, England. The wind howled across the English coastline as a formation of strange machines rumbled over the dunes. British engineers, the same ones who had once ridiculed the Churchill, now stood in awe as Major General Percy Hobart, commander of the newly formed 79th Armoured Division, inspected his funnies. Each tank was a bizarre creation. One Churchill carried a 290mm mortar capable of lobbing massive explosive flying dustbins at concrete bunkers. Another trailed a towed fuel trailer, the Crocodile, spitting a jet of flame that could reach 120 yards. Others had bridge-laying arms, mine flails, or canvas screens that let them swim ashore. The Churchill's broad tracks and massive hull made it the perfect foundation for Hobart's experimental designs. "She's ugly," Hobart admitted to a correspondent. "But by God, she's clever." Training was relentless. Crews learned to launch fascines, bundles of logs, into craters to make crossing points for infantry. AVRE gunners practiced loading and firing their monstrous mortars while blinded by dust and smoke. The smell of burnt diesel, cordite, and seawater clung to everything. At night, Hobart gathered his men in the barracks. Maps spread across the tables. "Gentlemen," he said, tapping a red circle labelled Normandy, "this is where they'll stop laughing." Word of the strange division spread through the Allied ranks. American officers visiting Orford called the vehicles British toys. The Canadians joked that the crocodiles would roast sausages on the beach, but Hobart's engineers knew better. They'd seen what the Atlantic Wall looked like: rows of bunkers, gun emplacements, and minefields stretching from Calais to Cherbourg. Ordinary tanks would die there. The funnies were built to survive. As D-Day approached, the tension grew. Soldiers painted white stripes on the hulls, waterproofed the exhausts, and loaded crates of ammunition. In the dim light of the hangars, mechanics worked in silence, tightening bolts and sealing hatches. Each man understood what was coming. June 5th, 1944, the night before the invasion, rain lashed the English Channel. Inside the landing craft, a Churchill AVRE commander named Corporal Dennis Rumbold scribbled a note to his wife. They called her a turtle. Tomorrow she'll crawl up Hitler's wall. By dawn, that prophecy would come true in fire and steel. June 6th, 1944, Sword Beach, Normandy. The world was on fire. The sea churned beneath grey skies as waves of landing craft crashed through the surf. The first ramp fell and hell opened. German MG-42s tore into the sand, bullets stitching the water with white spray. Out of the chaos came a low metallic growl, a Churchill AVR, its engine howling above the thunder of artillery. Inside, Corporal Dennis Rumbold's hands trembled on the controls. "Forward!" he shouted. The massive tracks bit into the sand, pulling 38 tons of steel through the shallows. Shells exploded around them. One hit the hull directly and bounced. When they reached the seawall, Rumbold's loader slammed a 40-pound mortar round into the barrel. Firing! A deafening roar, and a bunker vanished in a plume of smoke and dust. Across the beach, another Churchill, the Crocodile, unleashed a stream of liquid fire that snaked across the sand and engulfed a German pillbox. The defenders broke and ran, screaming. The flamethrowers' roar drowned everything else. "That did it," Rumbold muttered, wiping soot from his face. "They'll remember that one." Behind them, Royal Engineers cheered as they dragged their gear forward, using the Churchills as moving shields. The tanks crushed barbed wire, filled craters with fascines, and bridged ditches with iron girders. The once mocked turtle tank had become the unstoppable spearhead of the invasion. By noon, sections of the Atlantic Wall had fallen silent. Smoke and sand mingled with the smell of burning oil. Over the radio, commanders reported success. Sword secured, funnies effective, proceed inland. Farther down the coast, American units landing at Omaha struggled under brutal fire. But even they began requesting Hobart's contraptions. The US Army, once skeptical, now saw the genius of British engineering. "Send us those damn turtles," one American officer radioed, half in awe. By nightfall, Churchill tanks were rolling through the ruined streets of Lyon-sur-Mer, their armour scarred but unbroken. Soldiers clung to the sides, cheering as the machines ground forward through rubble and flame. In the field workshop that evening, Rumbold stepped out of his tank and looked at the horizon, smoke drifting over the sea, the sound of engines fading into dusk. He touched the side of the battered hull. "You did it, old girl," he whispered. They laughed once. They won't again. The engineers who had mocked her design now wrote letters home, proud to have built a legend. The Churchill's ungainly frame, its slow gait, its stubborn endurance, all had found their purpose that day. It wasn't beauty that won the beaches of Normandy. It was resilience.